My name is Nia. I am 28 years old, and my parents called me the dumb one my entire life. While my brother Darius received endless praise and a supposed full scholarship to Harvard, I was treated like an embarrassing secret. On the day of his graduation and engagement party, my father planned to announce that Darius would inherit everything: a brand new Tesla and a $20 million mansion. I was supposed to stand quietly in the background holding a catering tray, but they had no idea that a stranger was about to walk in, hand me a sealed envelope, and tell me it was time they learned who I really am. Before I tell you how I turned their elite high society gala into an absolute nightmare, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever had to completely destroy the toxic family members who underestimated your worth. The air in the grand foyer was thick with the suffocating scent of expensive perfumes, aged bourbon, and the unspoken rigid hierarchy of the local black elite. The living room of my father, Reverend Silas, and his sprawling estate was an architectural monument to his enormous ego. It featured towering 20-foot ceilings, a sweeping double staircase imported from Italy, and a massive crystal chandelier that cast a fractured prismatic glow over the 100-plus guests standing below. These were the gatekeepers of respectability in our city. The men stood in clustered circles, swirling their scotch glasses while discussing stock portfolios and golf handicaps. The women, adorned in tasteful pearls and designer gowns, formed their own exclusive tribunals. Their eyes darted around the room, silently judging the floral arrangements, the catering, and most frequently, each other. At the center of it all stood my father. Reverend Silas was holding court at the base of the grand staircase with his chest puffed out like a proud peacock. Beside him stood my older brother Darius, glowing under the intoxicating warmth of our father's unconditional approval. Darius was 30 years old and hailed as the golden child, the perfect son who had supposedly just finished his master's degree at Harvard. Beside Darius stood his fiancée, Camille. She was draped gracefully over his arm. Her blindingly large diamond engagement ring was strategically angled to catch the chandelier light every single time she reached for her glass. Camille came from a family of prominent judges and surgeons. To my parents, she was the ultimate trophy to elevate our bloodline and cement our social standing. I circulated the perimeter of the room, offering champagne to the church elders and the high society matriarchs. I was not dressed in a designer gown. Instead, I wore a stiff white catering uniform with a black apron tight around my waist. They took the glasses from my silver tray without making eye contact. To them, and to my own father, I was nothing more than a piece of moving furniture. The fact that I shared his last name was a highly guarded, deeply embarrassing secret that they went to great lengths to hide. I kept my posture rigid, and my face completely blank as I moved through the sea of wealthy guests. Suddenly, a sharp, manicured hand clamped down hard on my bicep. The long acrylic nails dug painfully into my skin through the thin fabric of my uniform. Before I could even turn around or speak, a voice hissed directly into my ear. "What exactly do you think you are doing?" I was yanked backward forcefully. I nearly tripped over the hem of my apron as my mother Yvonne dragged me out of the foyer. We pushed through the heavy mahogany doors and stumbled into the catering kitchen. The doors swung shut behind us, muting the elegant hum of the string quartet playing in the living room. The bright fluorescent lights of the kitchen buzzed overhead, a harsh contrast to the warm, ambient glow of the party outside. My mother spun me around and shoved me slightly so my back hit the stainless steel prep counter. She looked immaculate in her emerald green designer gown, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "I explicitly told you not to linger near the front foyer," Yvonne spat. Her voice was a venomous, controlled whisper meant to cut deep without carrying through the walls. She snatched the heavy silver tray of champagne flutes from my hands and slammed it onto the counter next to me, causing the crystal to rattle dangerously. "Do you have any idea who is out there right now?" she demanded, jabbing a manicured finger against my shoulder. "Half the deacon board from the church is out there. Camille's entire family is out there. Her parents are respected federal judges. And here you are hovering around them like a common beggar looking for handouts. What were you going to say if one of them actually spoke to you?" Were you going to tell the Honorable Judge Washington that you are a college dropout who works as a cashier? Do not humiliate this family today of all days. I stared at her perfectly powdered face. I kept my breathing slow and measured. I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing my eyes water or my hands shake. I was serving champagne to the guests, Mom, I said quietly. I kept my voice pitched to the exact tone of subservience she demanded. I was doing exactly what you ordered me to do when you handed me this uniform and told me to stay out of sight. Do not you dare talk back to me in that tone, Yvonne hissed. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, until I could smell the sharp mint of her breath. You are an absolute embarrassment, Nia. A complete and utter disappointment to this family. We gave you every opportunity. We provided a roof over your head. And what did you do? You threw your education away to sit in a dark room staring at a computer screen all day and night. You could have found a decent, God-fearing husband. You could have elevated our status. Instead, you are 28 years old, single, without a degree, and utterly useless. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the cold edge of the marble countertop behind me. The physical urge to scream the absolute truth at her burned in the back of my throat like battery acid. I wanted to tell her exactly what I had been doing on those computer screens for the last 5 years. I wanted to laugh in her face and shatter her delicate illusions about her golden son and her supposedly perfect life. But I swallowed the truth down. The timing had to be absolutely perfect. I pay my own rent, I said calmly. I live in my own apartment, and I do not ask you or Dad for a single dime. I'm not a burden to you anymore. Yvonne let out a harsh, mocking laugh that scraped against the quiet of the kitchen. Your rent? You mean that tiny, pathetic little studio apartment you hide in? Please. You think that impresses me? You think paying for a shoebox makes up for the intense shame you bring to this family? Look out there, Nia. Look at your brother Darius. He is marrying into a legacy. He is going to be a partner at a top-tier firm. He is elevating our bloodline to places you could never even dream of reaching. And you. She looked me up and down with an expression of pure revulsion, as if I were something foul she had stepped on in the street. You are a stain on our pristine reputation. Now take this tray, go out the back door and collect the empty glasses from the patio. Keep your head down. Do not speak to Camille's mother again, and stay entirely out of the photographs. I looked at my mother. I looked at the heavy gold jewelry dripping from her neck, bought on credit she could not afford. I looked at the desperate fear hiding just behind her angry eyes, the fear of being exposed, the fear of losing her precious status in this fragile elite community. And then slowly I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the calm, calculated smile of a hunter watching its prey walk blindly into a carefully laid trap. Of course, Mom, I said smoothly. I picked up the heavy silver tray again, wiping a non-existent speck of dust from its surface. I will make sure everything is perfectly clean for Darius and his wonderful bride. I would hate to ruin such a perfect evening for the golden child. Yvonne narrowed her eyes, clearly unsettled by my sudden shift in demeanor. Her massive ego would not allow her to dwell on my reaction for long. She scoffed and adjusted the neckline of her emerald gown, smoothing away any invisible wrinkles. Your father is getting ready to make the big announcement in 10 minutes, she said sharply. Make sure everyone has a full glass before he speaks. If you embarrass us tonight, Nia, you will never step foot in this house again. Do I make myself clear? Perfectly clear, I replied. She turned on her heel and pushed past me. The heavy scent of her perfume lingered in the warm kitchen air long after the swinging doors closed behind her. I stood alone in the catering kitchen, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and clinking crystal from the adjacent room. The stainless steel appliances gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, reflecting my calm expression. They thought they had me perfectly boxed in. They thought I was the tragic failed daughter, the cautionary tale they could whisper about at their elite charity galas to make themselves feel superior. They thought my silence was submission. They thought my lack of a traditional university degree meant a complete lack of intelligence and ambition. They did not know about the complex cybersecurity algorithms I had spent the last 5 years writing in that tiny studio apartment. They did not know about the countless nights I had spent teaching myself advanced coding encryption and digital architecture while working 3 minimum-wage jobs to survive. And they certainly did not know about the private meeting I had attended in Manhattan just 3 days ago with the senior partners of a massive global technology conglomerate. Yvonne thought she was protecting her family's reputation by hiding me in the kitchen and forcing me to wear an apron. She had absolutely no idea that I was about to dismantle her entire false reality brick by brick. I adjusted the cheap white gloves on my hands. I picked up a fresh linen towel and draped it over my forearm. I took one last deep breath to center myself before pushing through the swinging doors and walking straight back into the lion's den. It was almost time for my father's grand speech. I would not miss this performance for the world. The house of cards was perfectly stacked, and I was ready to pull out the bottom. I slipped back into the grand foyer just as the string quartet faded into a soft decrescendo. The heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me, sealing me inside the echo chamber of wealth and pretension. I gripped my silver tray, moving along the perimeter, blending into the shadows cast by the marble columns. The air was thick with expensive cologne and roasted prime rib. Across the room at the base of the sweeping Italian double staircase, my father raised a crystal champagne flute. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against the rim. The sharp chime sliced through the low hum of elite chatter. The sound was authoritative, demanding absolute submission from everyone present. Instantly, the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos parted. The murmurs died down, replaced by the rustle of silk and the shifting of leather shoes as all eyes turned toward Reverend Silas. He stood tall, adjusting the lapels of his custom Tom Ford suit, soaking in the collective admiration of the city's most elite black families. Beside him, Darius straightened his posture, puffing his chest to mirror our father. Camille leaned elegantly against Darius, her hand on his bicep, her posture radiating pure, unadulterated triumph. I stood silently near the catering entrance, my face a mask of neutrality. My father cleared his throat, letting the silence stretch for several agonizing seconds to ensure every person hung on his upcoming words. Brothers and sisters in Christ, esteemed colleagues and cherished friends, Silas began. His baritone voice resonated with the polished, rhythmic cadence of a seasoned preacher who knew how to manipulate an audience. I want to thank each and every one of you for gracing our home tonight. We are gathered here this evening to bear witness to the ultimate manifestation of faith, unyielding discipline, and the absolute power of Black excellence. A murmur of agreement rippled through the affluent crowd. Several church elders standing near the front row offered approving nods. My father placed his hand dramatically over his heart, looking out over the faces of the judges, doctors, and politicians he had spent decades trying to impress. When I built my real estate empire from the ground up, I did it with one singular vision burning in my mind. Silas continued, his voice rising in volume and theatrical emotion. Legacy. A man is absolutely nothing without his legacy. Wealth is temporary. These mansions are just brick and mortar. But a bloodline that commands respect, that wields unshakable power, that walks boldly in the favor of the Lord, that is eternal. The hypocrisy of his passionate words tasted like copper in the back of my mouth, but I kept my breathing perfectly steady and my eyes completely fixed on the spectacle unfolding on the staircase. And tonight my father roared, vibrating with overwhelming pride. I look at my eldest son, Darius, a newly minted graduate of Harvard University, a man who has never once faltered, never once disappointed me, and who carries the entire future of this family on his broad, capable shoulders. Darius, my boy, you are the undeniable pride of this family. You are the gold standard. The crowd erupted into enthusiastic applause. Darius bowed his head in mock humility, pressing a hand to his chest, playing the role of the dutiful and honorable son. My mother Yvonne, standing 2 steps below them, wiped a perfectly choreographed tear from her cheek. But words of praise are simply not enough for the man who will carry our great name into the next generation, Silas announced. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial, excited boom. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a small, sleek, black velvet box. He flipped it open, revealing a gleaming silver keycard. Darius, a king, needs a proper chariot to ride into his glorious future. Outside, parked in our circular driveway, is a brand new Tesla Model S Plaid. It is yours, my son, paid in full. Gasps of pure admiration swept through the massive room. Darius widened his eyes in genuine shock. His meticulously crafted, humble expression slipped for a fraction of a second to reveal the raw, unadulterated greed lurking beneath his polished exterior. He bounded up the remaining steps and threw his arms around father. The two men locked in a powerful, tight embrace. The crowd cheered even louder. The wealthy doctors and corporate lawyers nodded in deep approval at this magnificent display of generational wealth. "But wait, I am not finished," Silas bellowed over the cheering crowd, holding up a heavy hand to silence the deafening applause. "A chariot is just the beginning. A king also needs a castle to rule his domain." The room went dead silent once again. The tension was electric, crackling through the air like static. I stood near the kitchen doorway, the silver serving tray feeling slightly heavier in my hands as I waited for the final blow. Silas looked out over the crowd, his chest swelling with massive pride. "This very estate," Silas declared, "this $20 million home that has hosted mayors, governors, and the finest minds in this great state. When the time comes for me to eventually pass the torch, this house and the entirety of my commercial real estate holdings will bypass the probate courts completely. It will all be transferred directly into an irrevocable trust, and the sole beneficiary, the sole heir to my empire, will be Darius." The room absolutely exploded. People were whistling, clapping, and raising their crystal champagne glasses high into the air. Darius looked like he was going to ascend straight into the heavens. His face was flushed with total triumph. He kissed Camille passionately, the two of them basking in the intoxicating glow of absolute financial supremacy. I stood perfectly still. The sheer audacity of the grand announcement washed over me not as a shock, but as a sickening confirmation of their cruelty. I was not just the black sheep of the family, I had been entirely and deliberately erased from their future. As the thunderous applause finally began to die down, Camille stepped forward. She gently took the microphone from our father, offering him a very sweet, deferential smile. She was wearing a stunning white silk designer gown, her hair laid immaculately, the very picture of the perfect elite society wife. "If I may just say a few brief words," Camille said. Her voice was breathy and delicate, practically dripping with engineered grace. She looked up at Darius with wide, adoring eyes. "Darius, you are the most brilliant, honorable man I have ever known. I am so incredibly blessed to be joining this prestigious family, to be merging our wonderful legacies together. My parents have always taught me that excellence naturally attracts excellence. And looking around this room today, seeing the staggering heights this family has reached, I know we are going to build something truly unstoppable together." The crowd murmured in absolute adoration. She was hitting every single note, playing the respectability politics game like a concert pianist. Then her eyes drifted across the room. They scanned the crowd, bypassing the wealthy guests, the powerful politicians, the church leaders, until they locked directly onto me, standing silently by the kitchen door in my stiff catering uniform. A slow, viciously sweet smile spread across her perfectly glossed lips. "And of course we have to acknowledge the people working so incredibly hard behind the scenes tonight," Camille said. Her voice rang out clearly through the speakers, dripping with a poisonous, condescending syrup. "Nia, sweetie, thank you so much for helping the catering staff clear the dirty plates. It is just so wonderful that you could be useful to us tonight." The entire room turned to look at me. 100 pairs of eyes, heavy with pity and quiet judgment, pinned me against the wall. Camille took 2 elegant steps down the staircase, leaning forward as if speaking to a slow child. "Darius and I were just talking about you the other day, Nia. We know how much you have struggled since you left school. But do not you worry, sweetie. When Darius and I take over this beautiful estate, we are going to make sure you are taken care of. There is a lovely little storage room in the basement right off the laundry quarters. I will save that storage room for you so you are not homeless." A soft, polite chuckle rippled through the elite room. They thought she was showing Christian charity. I did not flush or look away, I just smirked. Their monumental arrogance had completely blinded them to the reality of the very ground beneath their designer feet. They were gleefully dancing on a hidden minefield, entirely unaware that I was already holding the detonator. I did not need to yell, cause a massive scene, or throw a drink in her perfectly powdered face. I gave Camille a slow, deliberate nod of complete acknowledgement, turned smoothly on my heel, and walked calmly out of the silent foyer. The heavy oak doors of the foyer closed behind me, shutting out the suffocating applause and the polite laughter of the elite crowd. I walked down the long, dimly lit corridor that led toward the back of the estate. The harsh click of my cheap catering shoes on the imported marble floors echoed in the sudden quiet. Camille had intended to crush my spirit with her condescending speech about saving a basement storage room for me. She wanted to see me break, to see the humiliation wash over my face in front of the city's most powerful families. Instead, her arrogant performance only fueled the cold fire burning in my chest. They were so busy congratulating themselves on their imaginary supremacy that they failed to notice the reality of their own situation. I needed extra cocktail napkins for the next round of champagne service. My mother insisted on keeping the surplus party supplies hidden away in my father's private study. She claimed the caterers could not be trusted not to steal the expensive embossed napkins. I navigated the familiar twisting hallways of the $20 million mansion. The walls were lined with massive oil portraits of my father and brother. They were painted to look like royalty sitting in high-backed leather chairs, with expressions of profound wisdom and divine right. There were no portraits of me. My existence had been scrubbed from the visual history of this family long ago. I did not mind. Being invisible gave me the ultimate advantage. They never saw me coming. As I approached the heavy double doors of the study, a sudden sharp noise stopped me dead in my tracks. It was not the sound of a celebration, it was the sound of glass shattering. I pressed my back flush against the cold wallpaper, directly beside the cracked door. The rich smell of spilled Scotch whiskey drifted into the hallway. The confident, booming preacher voice my father had just used to captivate 100 wealthy guests was completely gone. In its place was a frantic, breathless rasp. "You need to lower your voice," Darius Silas hissed, his tone laced with absolute panic. "If anyone out there hears you, we are completely finished. Do you understand me? We are walking a razor-thin line tonight, and you are losing your composure." The sound of heavy footsteps paced furiously across the Persian rug inside the study. Darius was breathing heavily. His voice, when he finally spoke, lacked any of the golden child arrogance he had displayed on the staircase just minutes prior. He sounded like a terrified little boy backed into a dark corner. "Lower my voice," Darius fired back, his volume rising despite the warning. "You just stood out there and promised me this entire estate. You handed me the keys to a kingdom that is actively burning to the ground. How long did you think you could hide this from me?" "I saw the papers on your desk, Dad. I saw the red stamps. I saw the final notices. You lied to me. You lied to Mom. You lied to the entire congregation." Silas let out a ragged, desperate sigh. The sound of liquid pouring into a fresh glass followed. "I did not lie to anyone," my father shot back defensively, trying to regain his typical authority. "I am simply managing a temporary cash flow issue. The church donations have been light this quarter. The real estate market has shifted. It is a minor setback. I have it completely under control. A temporary cash flow issue." Darius yelled, his voice cracking with absolute disbelief. "The bank is foreclosing on the mansion in 30 days. The commercial properties downtown have already been seized by the creditors. We are drowning in millions of dollars of debt. We are completely broke." The word broke hung in the air like a physical blow. It was the single most forbidden word in our family vocabulary. My parents would rather die than admit they lacked the financial means to support their luxurious lifestyle. They had spent decades building their reputation on the illusion of infinite wealth and divine favor. To hear Darius scream the truth behind closed doors was incredibly validating. I stood motionless in the hallway, absorbing every single syllable of their pathetic unraveling. The perfectly tailored suits and the grand speeches were nothing but a desperate smokescreen to hide their catastrophic failures. Keep your voice down, Silas commanded again, his tone growing vicious. You know nothing about high-level finance. You know nothing about the sacrifices I have made to keep that silver spoon in your mouth your entire life. Do not you dare stand in my study and judge my methods. I built this empire. I will save this empire. Darius let out a harsh, humorless laugh. Save it how? By making grand announcements about trusts that do not exist, by pretending you have $20 million in assets to pass down. Camille parents are federal judges, Dad. They have accountants, they have investigators. When we start merging our assets after the wedding, they are going to look into our books. They are going to see that the great Reverend Silas is nothing but a fraud living on borrowed time and maxed out credit lines. They will cancel the wedding. They will not cancel anything, Silas replied, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. Because Camille parents are going to save us. That is the entire point of this engagement, Darius. That is why I pushed you to propose to that girl. That is why we threw this massive party tonight. We needed to show them a flawless illusion of extreme wealth so they would feel comfortable releasing the dowry funds. I leaned closer to the crack in the door, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. The dowry. Camille family was deeply traditional and highly invested in maintaining their own generational wealth. I knew they had promised a massive financial gift to Darius and Camille upon their marriage, but I had no idea my father was relying on that exact money to avoid total bankruptcy. The sheer desperation of his plan was truly staggering to witness. You cannot be serious, Darius stammered, the panic in his voice escalating to a fever pitch. You are banking our entire survival on Camille family. You expect me to marry her just so you can steal her dowry? I am not stealing anything, Silas snapped angrily. It is an investment. Camille parents agreed to transfer $500,000 into the Church Community Development Fund as a tax-deductible wedding gift. Once that money hits the church accounts, I will reroute it to cover the immediate mortgage arrears on this house. It will buy me enough time to secure a new commercial loan and restructure the existing debt. It is a simple, brilliant maneuver. We just need to keep up the appearance of absolute prosperity until the wedding day. We just need to smile, shake their hands, and act like we own the entire world. Darius let out a sound of pure exasperation. $500,000. You think $500,000 is going to plug the holes in a sinking $20 million ship? It will barely cover the back taxes. And what happens when Camille's father asks to see the community center his money supposedly funded? What happens when the judges realize their daughter's wedding gift went straight to the bank to save your personal mansion from the auction block? They will throw us in federal prison, Dad. They will destroy our lives. Silas slammed his glass down onto the heavy mahogany desk. The sharp thud echoed loudly in the quiet study. No one is going to prison, he roared, losing his temper completely. I am a man of God. I am a pillar of this community. I have spent 30 years building my untouchable reputation in this city. The judges will not look closely because they trust the illusion we have built. Silas continued his breathing, heavy and erratic. They saw the Tesla tonight. They heard the speech. They believe you are stepping into a massive inheritance. People see what they want to see, Darius. They see the designer clothes, the imported cars, and the massive chandeliers. They never look behind the curtain. As long as you play your part perfectly, we will survive this. If you lose your nerve now, you will destroy us all. You need to go back out to that party, put your arm around your beautiful bride, and act like the king I just crowned you to be. Failure is absolutely not an option tonight. I stood in the shadow of the hallway processing the massive bomb that had just been dropped. My father was running a literal Ponzi scheme disguised as a church. He was actively planning to defraud a family of federal judges to save his own ego and his over-mortgaged mansion. The hypocrisy was so thick, I could practically taste it in the air. The men who had constantly degraded me for my lack of a formal degree were entirely incompetent themselves. They were standing on the absolute brink of total financial annihilation, clinging desperately to a fake social status that meant absolutely nothing. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. They had called me the dumb one. They had hidden me in the kitchen because I was supposedly an embarrassment to their pristine bloodline. Yet here I was, the only person in the entire family who actually owned everything I claimed to own. I possessed true wealth while they possessed nothing but crippling anxiety and mounting debts. Darius paced across the room again, his footsteps heavy. "This is madness," Darius muttered, his voice tight with lingering fear. "If Camille finds out, she will leave me. She is obsessed with status, Dad. She only agreed to marry me because she thinks I am inheriting an empire. If she finds out I am completely broke, she will drop me in a heartbeat. She will make sure her parents ruin us publicly. We will be laughing stocks. We will be entirely blacklisted from every country club and charity board in the state." Silas stepped forward. I could hear the rustle of his expensive suit fabric. "Then make absolutely sure she does not find out," Silas commanded, his tone dead and ruthless. "You will lie to her. You will smile for the cameras. You will play the perfect, successful son. If Camille parents do not transfer that $500,000 dowry investment into the church after the wedding, we will be living on the street. We will lose everything, Darius. The cars, the house, the reputation, everything. I will not let that happen. Do you hear me? I will not go back to being a nobody. I will not let those snobs out there look down on me." I listened to the desperate finality in my father's voice. He was a cornered animal willing to sacrifice anyone and anything to protect his own pride. He was willing to risk federal prison to maintain the illusion that he was better than everyone else. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was the exact ammunition I needed to completely destroy them. The cocktail napkins I had been sent to retrieve were no longer important. The pristine silver tray in my hands felt like a weapon. I shifted my weight slightly, preparing to step back into the shadows of the corridor before they could detect my presence. But my curiosity rooted me to the spot. There was one piece of the puzzle that still did not make sense. I knew the extent of their financial ruin now. I knew about the impending foreclosure and the desperate plan to steal the dowry money. But one glaring question remained entirely unanswered. If my father was truly flat broke and drowning in debt, how had he managed to produce a brand new top-of-the-line electric vehicle for the grand presentation in the foyer? A car like that required cold, hard cash or an immaculate credit score. Given the pile of final notices sitting on my father's desk, he clearly possessed neither of those things. The math simply did not add up. I pressed my ear closer to the narrow opening of the heavy door, holding my breath. I needed to hear the rest of their conversation. I needed to know exactly how deep their deception truly went. The silence inside the study stretched on for a few tense moments, broken only by the sound of Darius pouring himself another stiff drink. I could hear the ice clinking violently against the glass, a clear indication that his hands were shaking uncontrollably. The golden child was cracking under the immense pressure of his fake reality. He cleared his throat, taking a long, slow sip of the liquor. I heard him set the heavy crystal glass back down on the desk with a sharp thud. His next words shifted the entire trajectory of the evening. They took the conversation from a desperate financial struggle to a calculated criminal betrayal, and it was a betrayal that involved me directly. I closed my eyes and listened carefully as Darius asked the exact question I had been pondering in my own mind. "If we are completely bankrupt, Dad, how exactly did a brand new top-of-the-line Tesla end up sitting in our circular driveway tonight?" Darius asked, his voice dropping an octave as the reality of their situation collided with the physical evidence parked outside. "You just handed me the keys to a $150,000 vehicle in front of the entire congregation and Camille family. The dealership did not hand that over on faith alone. They do not accept prayers for a down payment. You said yourself our credit lines are completely maxed out. You said the commercial accounts are frozen tight. So where did the capital come from?" My father did not answer immediately. The heavy silence in the study was punctuated only by the sharp clink of ice cubes against crystal as Silas poured himself another generous measure of scotch. I could perfectly picture his arrogant posture leaning against the polished mahogany edge of his desk. He was a man who believed his own divine authority exempted him from the laws of mere mortals. When he finally spoke, his tone was remarkably steady, stripped of the panicked frenzy from just moments ago. It was the calm, chilling cadence of a cornered predator rationalizing its survival against all odds. There are always creative avenues for acquiring assets when you understand how the financial system truly operates, Darius Silas said smoothly. You think wealthy men survive temporary setbacks by playing by the rigid rules designed for the poor. We adapt. We leverage the resources available to us within our own household. I simply utilized an untapped asset to secure the vehicle and project the image of absolute stability. What untapped asset? Darius demanded, pacing the length of the Persian rug. The sound of his expensive leather shoes scuffing the intricate fabric vibrated through the hardwood floorboards. We have multiple mortgages on this estate. Every single commercial property is leveraged to the absolute limit. You just admitted we are facing imminent foreclosure in a matter of weeks. There are no untapped assets left in this family name. What did you do? I did not use our name, Silas stated coldly, taking a slow, measured sip of his drink. I used your sister name. The words hung in the stagnant air of the study like a physical execution order. My breath hitched sharply in my throat, but I forced myself to remain completely silent, pressing my back harder against the hallway wall. I squeezed my eyes shut as a violent wave of intense nausea crashed over me. The sheer audacity of his casual confession made my skin crawl with an icy prickling sensation. You used Nia name, Darius repeated, sounding utterly bewildered by the revelation. How is that even possible? Nia works as a cashier. She serves drinks at our parties in a uniform. She does not make enough money to finance a used Honda, let alone a six-figure luxury electric vehicle. No reputable dealership on the planet would approve her for that kind of massive auto loan. They run background checks, they verify income. That is exactly where you are wrong, my father countered, a sickening note of pride bleeding into his deep voice. You do not understand how the credit bureaus evaluate consumer data. Nia might be a financial failure in the real world, but on paper, her credit profile is an absolute blank slate. She has no mortgages. She has no commercial debt. She has zero defaulted loans because she has never possessed the ambition to borrow money. Her social security number is completely pristine. She is a ghost in the financial system. When I submitted the application online using her credentials, the bank algorithms did not see a college dropout serving champagne. They saw a clean, unburdened consumer. The automated system approved the $150,000 loan instantly. I stood frozen in the dim corridor as the sheer magnitude of my father's criminal betrayal washed over me. He had not just hidden me in the catering kitchen to protect his elite social standing. He had actively stolen my identity. He had weaponized my social security number to purchase a shiny prop for his golden child. He had deliberately chained me to a massive six-figure debt without my knowledge, purely to maintain his fraudulent facade in front of his wealthy peers. My own father had forged my financial execution. Darius let out a sharp, frantic breath. You committed identity theft, Dad. You committed felony wire fraud. You forged Nia's signature on a $150,000 auto loan. If the bank finds out, they will send you to federal prison. If Camille's parents find out, they will use their judicial connections to bury you under the jail. What happens when the monthly payments start arriving at Nia's apartment? What happens when she sees a massive auto loan on her credit report? She will panic. She will not see anything. Silas snapped, dismissing the very real legal threat with a wave of his hand. I routed all the billing statements to a private post office box under my exclusive control. Nia does not monitor her credit score. Why would she? She has absolutely zero assets to protect. She lives in a pathetic studio apartment and has zero upward mobility. By the time the first payment is due, we will have secured the $500,000 dowry from Camille's family. I will pay off the car loan in full with cash and close the account before your sister even realizes her pristine social security number was utilized for the greater good of this family. The greater good, Darius echoed, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and dark awe. Dad, this is insane. If Nia finds out, she will go straight to the police. You know how stubborn she is. She will not stay quiet to protect the family reputation if it means she is on the hook for a six-figure debt. She hates us. Nia will do exactly what I tell her to do. Silas growled, his voice hardening into a dark, authoritarian rumble that he usually reserved for his most passionate sermons. She owes this family. She has humiliated us for years with her lack of ambition and her stubborn refusal to conform to our standards. We fed her, we clothed her, we kept a luxury roof over her head during her childhood. This is the absolute least she can do to repay the immense debt of her existence. My father took a slow, heavy step across the study. I could hear the aggressive creak of the floorboards beneath his substantial weight. His next words were delivered with the terrifying conviction of a religious zealot justifying a holy crusade. Listen to me, Darius, and listen carefully. You are the son. You are the man who carries our sacred last name into the future. It is the fundamental duty of the women in this family to sacrifice their own comfort to ensure the survival and elevation of the men. Your mother understands this vital principle. She has sacrificed her entire life to support my ministry and my business ventures. Nia is a failure. Her life has no upward trajectory. Therefore, her pristine credit score is completely wasted on her. It is her inherent duty to sacrifice her financial standing to protect the men of this family. I simply claimed what was rightfully mine to take. The sheer toxicity of his patriarchal delusion was suffocating. He viewed me not as a human being, not as his daughter, but as a disposable resource to be harvested. I was a tool to be used and discarded without a second thought. He felt absolutely zero remorse for committing a federal crime against his own flesh and blood, because he genuinely believed my life held no intrinsic value outside of serving his monstrous, fragile ego. I needed that vehicle to secure your future. Silas continued, his tone softening slightly as he sought to bring Darius back into his twisted fold. When Camille parents saw you standing next to that luxury car, it cemented their firm belief in our generational wealth. It guaranteed the dowry payment. Nia credit score is the exact stepping stone you needed to secure your elite marriage and save this estate. You should be thanking me for having the vision to execute such a bold, brilliant strategy. Silence stretched across the lavish study. The frantic pacing had stopped entirely. I waited in the dark hallway, my hands clenched into tight, aching fists, anticipating Darius' response. I waited for the golden child to summon a single shred of moral decency. I waited for my brother to reject the stolen car, to demand that our father fix the horrific crime he had just committed against his own sister. I wanted him to prove he was better than this profound corruption. Instead, I heard the sickening clink of a glass being raised. "You are right, Dad," Darius said, his voice shedding its previous panic, replacing it with a cold, calculated acceptance. Camille father looked at me with total respect when you handed me those keys. He sees me as an equal now. Nia is never going to use her credit anyway. She will probably work minimum wage catering jobs for the rest of her life. It would be a complete waste to let a perfectly clean financial profile sit dormant while we are fighting to save our legacy. Exactly, my son, Silas replied, sounding deeply satisfied that his heir had embraced the criminal deception. We do what is absolutely necessary to survive. We do what is necessary to project dominance and power. Now finish your drink. We have an elite wedding to secure and an audience waiting for their kings to return. I slowly pulled my back away from the hallway wall. The physical shock that had temporarily paralyzed my limbs evaporated completely. The burning anger in the back of my throat cooled into a sheet of solid, impenetrable ice. Any lingering trace of familial loyalty I might have harbored, any tiny, desperate hope that my father and brother possessed a single ounce of genuine love for me, was eradicated in that exact moment. They were entirely hollow inside. They had crossed the ultimate unforgivable line. They had not just insulted my career choices or hidden me from their snobby guests in a catering kitchen. They had actively committed felony identity theft to fund their fragile, crumbling illusions. They believed I was too stupid to monitor my own financial records. They believed I was too weak and submissive to fight back. They genuinely thought I was a pathetic, helpless failure who would blindly absorb a massive six-figure debt so my brother could parade around in a stolen luxury vehicle. They were so incredibly wrong. I did not shed a single tear. Crying was a useless reaction meant for victims, and I was no longer a victim in this scenario. I was the executioner, and my father had just blindly handed me the sharpened axe. I adjusted the stiff collar of my white catering uniform. I looked down at the empty silver tray resting in my hands. The polished metal reflected my own fierce, unyielding gaze. My father wanted to play a high-stakes game of financial warfare. He wanted to weaponize my identity to save his sinking ship of an estate. He had absolutely no idea that his supposed failure of a daughter had already conquered the digital world he so desperately tried to manipulate. I did not need to run to the police in tears. I did not need to scream in the hallway. I simply needed to finish my catering shift and let the ultimate trap snap shut on their arrogant throats. I pushed the heavy mahogany door open. The antique brass hinges let out a long groan that shattered the celebratory atmosphere inside the study. I stepped over the threshold, letting the door swing shut behind me with a loud click. The silence that followed was absolute. Silas and Darius froze completely, looking like cheap wax figures caught in a harsh spotlight. Darius had his crystal glass raised halfway to his mouth. His hand jerked violently, splashing expensive amber scotch directly onto the pristine cuff of his tuxedo shirt. He gasped, choking on the sharp fumes, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. He looked like a guilty child. My father reacted differently. The blood drained from his face, leaving his ruddy complexion a sickly shade of ash gray. His massive hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. For 5 agonizing seconds, neither breathed. They stared at me standing there in my stiff catering uniform, holding my cheap silver serving tray. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact. I let the suffocating silence stretch out, letting them drown in the terrifying realization of their exposure. "Nia," my father stammered, his booming baritone voice reducing to a weak, pathetic rasp. "How long have you been standing out there?" "Long enough," I replied. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. "Long enough to hear about the foreclosure. Long enough to hear about the dowry scheme. Long enough to hear how you financed that shiny new Tesla parked in the driveway." Darius let out a whimpering sound and stepped backward, bumping into the bookcase. He looked at our father silently, begging him to fix this catastrophic disaster. Silas straightened his posture, forcing his broad shoulders back. He took a breath, attempting to summon the divine authority he used to dominate his congregation. He tried to physically intimidate me by puffing out his chest. "You listen to me very carefully," Silas commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous low rumble. "You heard portions of a highly complex financial discussion that you do not understand. You are taking snippets of an adult conversation out of context and jumping to hysterical conclusions." "I am not hysterical, Dad," I stated calmly, shifting my weight and letting the silver tray rest against my hip. "You committed felony wire fraud. You stole my social security number to buy a luxury car because you are completely bankrupt. There is no context that makes identity theft a righteous act." Silas' face flushed a deep, violent crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his starched white collar. He realized instantly that his typical intimidation tactics were not working. The fear that had paralyzed him morphed rapidly into a vicious defensive rage. He abandoned the calm, rational approach and immediately resorted to the psychological warfare he had utilized to control our family for decades. "Do not you dare use that disrespectful tone with me," he roared, pointing a heavy finger at my face. "You know nothing about the massive burdens I carry to protect this family. I am the patriarch of this household. I make the decisions required to ensure our survival. What I did was not theft. It was a strategic temporary loan, a necessary maneuver to bridge a minor cash flow gap." "A temporary loan?" Darius echoed, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he tried to back up our father. "That is right, Nia. It is just a temporary measure. We are going to pay the entire balance off the minute the wedding dowry clears the bank. You will not have to pay a single solitary dime. We are protecting the estate. You are blowing this completely out of proportion." I slowly turned my gaze to my brother. Darius flinched under my stare. "You are going to pay off a $150,000 loan with stolen dowry money from Camille's parents?" I asked, my voice dripping with calculated venom. What happens when the judges find out you defrauded them? What happens when the bank realizes you falsified the income documents? You are incredibly pathetic. Honor thy father and thy mother. Silas bellowed, quoting scripture with terrifying intensity. He took another aggressive step forward. That is the fundamental law of God, Nia. I gave you life. I provided a roof over your ungrateful head. You have spent your adult life leeching off the success of this family while contributing absolutely nothing to our legacy. You are a failure. You have deliberately humiliated me in front of my elite peers. You owe me. Silas spat the words, hitting the air like physical projectiles. You owe me for your very existence. Using your pristine credit score is the absolute least you can do to pay your parents back for everything we have sacrificed. It is your inherent duty to step up and protect the men of this family. I did not steal your identity. I merely activated an asset that rightfully belonged to me. You will stay quiet about this minor adjustment. You will walk back out to that kitchen and serve the champagne. If you breathe a single word of this, I will ensure you are cut off forever. I stood perfectly still, letting his psychological manipulation wash over me. In the past, a vicious speech like that would have crushed my spirit. It would have sent me running away, questioning my self-worth. It would have triggered a panic attack and forced me into submission. They expected me to break. They expected me to scream, cry, and throw an emotional tantrum. They wanted me to become the hysterical daughter they claimed I was. But I felt absolutely nothing. No fear, no sorrow, no desire for their approval. The man screaming in my face was not a powerful patriarch or a divine messenger. He was just a desperate broke criminal wearing an expensive rented tuxedo. He was a fraud terrified of losing his country club memberships. And the brother cowering behind him was nothing but a spineless coward, incapable of surviving in the real world without a stolen safety net. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not utter a single word of defense. I simply reached into the deep pocket of my stiff white catering apron. My fingers wrapped around the smooth, cool metal of my smartphone. I pulled the device out and held it up. The bright glow of the digital screen illuminated the dark shadows of the study, reflecting off the polished mahogany desk. Silas stopped screaming instantly. His mouth hung open in silent confusion. Darius let out a sharp gasp, his eyes darting frantically between my face and the glowing phone in my hand. "What are you doing?" Silas demanded, his voice suddenly laced with genuine panic. "Put that phone away, Nia. Who are you calling? Put that device down immediately." I ignored his desperate demands. I tapped the screen, opening my encrypted messaging application. I scrolled past the mundane catering group chats and located the contact I needed. Arthur Pierce, senior partner at Pierce and Vance Corporate Litigation. He was the most ruthless financial attorney in the state. And he had been working exclusively for me for 6 months, quietly assembling the most devastating legal trap in corporate history. I tapped on the message field. The digital keyboard popped up on the screen. My thumbs moved with practiced, effortless precision. I typed 4 simple words. Initiate the final step. I stared at the text message for a second. This was the point of no return. Once I hit send, the avalanche would begin. The dominoes would fall, and the false empire my father built would be pulverized into dust. The forensic accountants would freeze the accounts. The federal authorities would be notified of the wire fraud. The media would receive the leaked foreclosure documents. And the great Reverend Silas would be publicly unmasked as a broke, desperate criminal. I pressed the blue send button. The phone emitted a soft swoosh sound, confirming the message had been delivered. The physical sensation of pressing that button sent a rush of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. The invisible chains that had bound me to this toxic family for my entire life shattered completely. I was finally free. I casually slid the smartphone back into the deep pocket of my catering apron. I adjusted the cheap silver serving tray in my hands, making sure it was perfectly balanced. I looked up and met my father's furious, terrified gaze. I did not blink. I offered him a slow, chillingly calm smile that caused all the remaining color to drain completely out of his face. "I will go serve the champagne now, Reverend," I said, my voice soft and absolutely lethal. I turned smoothly on my heel, my catering shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. I walked out of the study, leaving the oak doors open behind me. I did not look back at the men frozen in terrified silence. I walked calmly down the dimly lit corridor, heading back toward the vibrant lights and the deafening applause. Crossing from the shadows of the corridor back into the radiant glow of the grand foyer felt like entering a different dimension. I slipped back to my designated station near the catering entrance, keeping my posture perfectly rigid. The string quartet played a lively, upbeat tempo, matching the escalating energy. The celebration was reaching its absolute peak of vanity. Everywhere I looked, I saw glittering diamonds flashing Rolex watches and the bright smiles of the elite families. They remained entirely oblivious that the floor beneath their expensive shoes was caving in. Camille held court near the sweeping staircase, radiating a sickening aura of unearned triumph. She balanced a crystal flute of vintage champagne, gesturing animatedly toward the massive chandelier overhead. She was surrounded by a tight circle of wealthy socialites, soaking in their envious congratulations. My mother, Yvonne, stood proudly by her side, playing the role of the immaculate matriarch to perfection. Yvonne wore a custom silver gown that caught the light, accepting praises for her successful son. They were both drunk on the illusion of absolute supremacy. I gripped the edges of my cheap silver serving tray, feeling the cold metal press against my palms. I quietly watched their pathetic social dance with clinical detachment. I had sent the message. The gears of total destruction were turning. The real world was about to crash through the heavy oak doors. The first sign of the impending disruption was not a sound, but a sudden, overwhelming shift in the light. A barrage of blindingly bright headlights swept aggressively across the towering arched windows that lined the front of the estate. Harsh beams sliced through the warm, ambient lighting, casting distorted shadows against the marble walls. The string quartet faltered their bows, pausing mid-stroke as the screech of heavy-duty tires against the circular driveway broke the polite hum of high society chatter. A low murmur instantly rippled through the sea of guests. Heads turned toward the massive front entrance. People stepped away from the lavish buffet tables, their conversations dying out as a heavy commanding engine rumble vibrated through the foundation of the house. This was not the polite purr of a luxury sedan, but the aggressive growl of a tactical fleet. Through the frosted glass panels of the double doors, the dark imposing silhouettes of massive vehicles came to an abrupt, synchronized halt. Four jet-black bulletproof Cadillac Escalades had pulled into the driveway, forming a tight protective blockade directly in front of the steps. The aggressive scale of the arrival commanded the absolute attention of everyone present. The air in the foyer grew thick with immediate electric tension. Wealthy politicians and seasoned corporate executives nervously adjusted their ties, suddenly feeling small and profoundly inadequate in the face of such a blatant display of raw power. The heavy mahogany doors swung open with a forceful, violent thud. Two massive men wearing immaculate black suits and clear earpieces threw them wide open. The security detail stepped sharply into the foyer, their eyes scanning the affluent crowd with the cold precision of predators. They parted silently, creating a wide, clear path for the man who followed. Arthur Pierce stepped over the threshold, carrying the kind of devastating authority that could not be faked. He did not walk into the room, he instantly conquered it. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that radiated severe corporate lethality. His piercing gray eyes held the merciless confidence of a man who routinely destroyed empires before his morning coffee. He gripped a sleek black leather briefcase in his right hand. The moment he entered the foyer, the ambient temperature of the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The wealthy guests automatically backed away, clearing a massive perimeter around him. No one spoke. No one breathed. The display of authentic power was so overwhelming that the local elite were instantly reduced to terrified spectators. My mother, Yvonne, was the first to react. She broke away from her circle of socialites, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and aggressive, calculating greed. She recognized the undeniable scent of billion-dollar wealth. She did not know who this man was, but she knew instantly that he represented a level of financial supremacy that dwarfed everyone else in the room. Camille followed closely on her heels, her own eyes flashing with desperate opportunistic hunger. I watched from my quiet station near the kitchen door as the two women rapidly adjusted their postures, smoothing their expensive designer gowns and pasting on their most dazzling sycophantic smiles. They clearly assumed this imposing titan of industry was a major unannounced investor. Perhaps he was a billionaire benefactor looking to inject massive capital into my father church development fund. In their delusional minds, this grand arrival was simply another ultimate blessing validating their elite status. Oh my goodness, what an absolute honor! Yvonne practically purred, her voice dripping with manufactured charm as she rushed forward to intercept the powerful stranger. She extended her hand, her diamond rings catching the light. "Welcome to our humble estate, sir. We are just so incredibly blessed to have you grace our celebration tonight. I am Yvonne, the matriarch of this household, and this is my beautiful future daughter-in-law, Camille." Camille stepped up beside her, batting her eyelashes and tilting her head in a perfect display of submissive grace. "We are absolutely thrilled to welcome you." Camille added, her tone vibrating with eager desperation. "Please allow us to offer you a glass of our finest vintage champagne. We have so much to discuss regarding our family future." They stood directly in Arthur Pierce's path, blocking his trajectory toward the center of the room. They expected him to stop. They expected him to take Yvonne's hand, to kiss Camille's cheek, to marvel at their beauty, and shower them with the elite respect they so fiercely believed they deserved. Arthur Pierce did not stop. He did not slow his pace. He did not blink. He glided past them, as if they were absolutely nothing but empty space. He did not offer a polite nod. He did not issue a brief excuse. He walked straight through their pathetic greeting, ignoring their outstretched hands and their sycophantic smiles with a level of cold, devastating indifference that was practically violent. He moved past Yvonne and Camille like they were invisible ghosts, haunting a house he was about to demolish. Yvonne's hand remained suspended in the empty air, her fake smile shattered, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated humiliation. A collective gasp rippled through the surrounding crowd of guests. The mighty matriarch of the household had just been publicly swatted aside like a minor irritating insect. Camille's face flushed a violent, angry red, her jaw dropping open in total shock. They spun around, staring at the back of his suit, completely paralyzed by the massive, unprecedented snub. Arthur Pierce ignored the gasps and the frantic whispers erupting behind him. He continued his deliberate, relentless march across the vast marble floor. His sharp gray eyes scanned the sea of designer tuxedos and expensive gowns, dismissing the mayors, the doctors, and the corporate lawyers with absolute brutal efficiency. He was searching for one specific person. He was searching for the only individual in the entire building who actually mattered. His gaze swept past the grand double staircase. He bypassed the decorated champagne fountains. He ignored the towering ice sculptures. His eyes finally locked onto the dark, quiet corner near the catering entrance. He looked directly at me. I stood perfectly still, the cheap silver serving tray still balanced lightly against my hip. I wore the same stiff, uncomfortable white catering uniform I had been wearing all night. My hair was pulled back simply. I wore zero jewelry and absolutely no makeup. I was the absolute visual antithesis of the glittering, wealthy socialites panicking all around me. Arthur Pierce adjusted his grip on his heavy leather briefcase. The heavy silence in the room intensified until the only sound echoing off the high ceilings was the sharp, rhythmic click of his highly polished shoes approaching my position. Every pair of eyes in the mansion followed his movement. My mother Yvonne let out a soft, strangled wheeze of pure disbelief as she watched the most powerful man she had ever seen approach the daughter she had completely erased. Arthur Pierce stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. The imposing security detail flanked him, standing like silent, lethal statues. He looked down at my cheap uniform and the silver tray in my hands. He did not offer a look of pity or confusion. He offered a look of profound, absolute respect. Without a single word, Arthur Pierce brought his feet together. He placed his left hand against the side of his bespoke suit, and in front of my horrified mother, my panicked brother, and 100 of the most elite families in the city, The ruthless titan of industry bowed a full rigid 90 degrees. The collective intake of breath from the surrounding crowd sounded like a sudden vacuum pulling all the oxygen from the grand foyer. Arthur Pierce, the man who had just ignored the mayor and walked straight through the matriarch of the estate, remained frozen in his deep bow. He held the position for 3 full seconds, demonstrating a level of subservience that completely defied the natural order of the room. When he finally straightened his spine, his expression was one of absolute professional reverence. He did not look at my stained catering apron. He did not glance at the cheap silver tray resting against my hip. He looked directly into my eyes, addressing me as if I were the only human being in the building with any measurable worth. "Good evening, Ms. Nia," Mr. Pierce said, his voice carrying a crisp, commanding resonance that sliced perfectly through the dead silence of the mansion. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but the urgency of the situation required my immediate physical presence. The final signatures were verified less than 20 minutes ago. He spoke with absolute clarity, deliberately projecting his voice so that every single wealthy guest, every eavesdropping politician, and my completely paralyzed family members could hear every single syllable. "I am here to formally announce that the acquisition is complete." Mr. Pierce continued, his tone ringing with triumphant finality. "Tech Giant has officially finalized the purchase of the proprietary cybersecurity system you founded, designed, and independently patented. The board of directors signed the ultimate transfer agreement at precisely 8 o'clock tonight. They were absolutely thrilled to meet your strict terms. You are now fully divested from the company." The words echoed off the marble walls, bouncing around the grand foyer like a series of controlled detonations. Cybersecurity system. Founded. Patented. Acquisition. These were terms that belonged in high-stakes corporate boardrooms, not directed at a silent daughter wearing a polyester catering uniform. The surrounding wealthy guests immediately exchanged wild and bewildered glances. The elite socialites who had spent the entire evening ignoring my existence now stared at me with wide, terrified eyes, trying to comprehend the massive paradigm shift unfolding right in front of their faces. I watched my father Silas stagger out of the study corridor, his heavy footsteps completely uncoordinated. He looked like a man who had just taken a physical blow to the chest. Darius stood frozen behind him, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. They had just spent 20 minutes screaming at me in a locked room, calling me a worthless failure and a pathetic leech. They had just justified committing felony wire fraud because they genuinely believed I had absolutely zero financial value. Now they were watching the most feared corporate litigator in the city treat me like a ruling monarch. Mr. Pierce did not wait for the crowd to recover from their shock. He placed his sleek black leather briefcase onto a nearby marble pedestal. The sharp snap of the metal latches popping open sounded like gunshots in the quiet room. He reached inside and retrieved a thick premium vellum envelope sealed with dark red wax. He turned back to me, holding the envelope with both hands. "As per your explicit instructions, we demanded the initial payout be delivered in a certified physical format, rather than a direct wire transfer," Mr. Pierce explained, his lips curling into a rare, razor-sharp smile. Tech Giant attempted to negotiate a staggered payout structure, but we completely destroyed their leverage. They capitulated to every single demand you outlined. "The funds have been fully cleared and authenticated by the Federal Reserve." He stepped forward and extended the envelope toward me. I slowly took one hand off the silver serving tray and reached out. My fingers brushed against the heavy textured paper. I broke the red wax seal with my thumb and pulled out the crisp certified cashier check printed on secure bank parchment. I did not need to look at the numbers. I already knew exactly what they were. I had dictated the terms of the sale myself, sitting alone in the dark corner of my cramped studio apartment months ago. But Mr. Pierce was a master of corporate theater. He knew exactly how to deliver the final lethal blow to the arrogant audience surrounding us. "For the complete acquisition of your proprietary source code and your total intellectual property rights," Mr. Pierce announced, his voice booming across the foyer, "the final closing check is for exactly $12 million. The room erupted. It was not a polite murmur. It was a massive visceral gasp of pure, unadulterated shock. $12 million. The number hit the crowd like a physical shockwave. A woman standing near the sweeping staircase dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered violently against the marble floor, sending shards of expensive glass flying, but absolutely no one looked down. Every single eye remained completely riveted on the piece of paper resting in my hand. $12 million was not just wealth. In this specific circle, it was absolute, undeniable power. It was more liquid capital than my father had generated in his entire pathetic, fraudulent career. It was more money than Darius could ever hope to see in his lifetime. It eclipsed the highly coveted dowry from Camille family by a staggering margin, making their pathetic financial scheming look like child play. I was holding enough capital to buy the entire estate, pay off every single hidden mortgage, and still have millions left over. I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not smile. I did not cheer. I simply looked at the check and then slowly slipped it into the pocket of my cheap white apron, resting it right next to my smartphone. "Thank you, Arthur," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Your team executed the strategy perfectly." "It was our absolute privilege, Ms. Nia," he replied, bowing his head once more. Suddenly, a loud, frantic sound broke through the stunned silence. It was the sound of high heels clicking rapidly against the marble floor. My mother Yvonne had broken through the front line of the crowd. The absolute humiliation she had suffered just moments ago when Mr. Pierce ignored her completely vanished. The aggressive, calculating greed that fueled her entire existence had completely overridden her shame. The mere mention of $12 million had activated a desperate, frantic hunger deep inside her hollow chest. She rushed toward me, her arms thrown wide open. Her custom silver gown swished around her ankles as she ran. Heavy tears streamed down her perfectly manicured face, ruining her expensive makeup. It was a flawless performance of sudden, overwhelming maternal pride. She was ready to rewrite history on the spot. She was ready to pretend she had always believed in me, always supported me, always loved me. "Nia, my beautiful, brilliant girl," Yvonne cried out, her voice echoing with manufactured absolute joy. "I always knew it. I always knew you were hiding a magnificent secret. Oh, my genius daughter, come here and let your mother hug you. We are just so incredibly proud of you." She lunged forward, ready to wrap her arms around my neck and claim her piece of the victory. She wanted to pull me into a tight embrace for the audience, proving to the elite crowd that this $12 million triumph belonged to the family. She wanted to validate her position as the matriarch of a newfound fortune. I did not step back. I did not flinch. I waited until she was exactly 1 foot away, until I could smell the overpowering scent of her expensive perfume and see the desperate, frantic greed burning in her tear-filled eyes. As she threw her arms out to embrace me, I moved my hand with blinding speed. Smack! The sound of my palm striking her wrist cracked through the air. It was a sharp, vicious sound that echoed loudly across the high ceilings of the foyer. I slapped her hand away with so much cold, brutal force that she physically stumbled sideways. She gasped, clutching her stinging wrist against her chest, her mouth falling open in genuine shock. The entire crowd flinched, collectively stepping backward. "Do not touch me," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifying register. The absolute venom in my tone froze her completely in place. Nia Yvonne whimpered, her eyes darting frantically toward the watching guests, trying to salvage her shattered dignity. "Honey, please, you are just overwhelmed by the excitement. We are your family. We love you so much." "You do not love me, Yvonne," I stated clearly, stripping away her title of mother. "You love $12 million. You love the cameras and the country club memberships. You love parading your fake wealth around to impress people who do not even care about you. 10 minutes ago, you were forcing me to serve champagne from a kitchen so I would not embarrass your precious future daughter-in-law." The crowd remained perfectly silent, holding their collective breath as the reality of my words sank in. I stared down at my mother, watching her desperately try to maintain her balance in her heavy silver gown. She realized the dynamic had permanently shifted, and she possessed zero leverage. My father Silas pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He was sweating profusely, but he threw his head back and forced another loud, booming laugh into the silent room. "What a spectacular turn of events," Silas announced, his baritone voice shaking slightly despite his desperate attempt at projecting confidence. "Look at this magnificent blessing from the Lord." My brilliant daughter has secured a miraculous victory for the Adams estate. This $12 million triumph is exactly the miracle we needed to save the family. He genuinely believed he could sweep his crimes under the rug by claiming my success as his own divine salvation. He actually thought I was going to hand over my $12 million check to cover his massive debts and fund Darius' pathetic elite wedding. I simply extended my open palm toward Arthur Pierce. Mr. Pierce did not hesitate. He reached into his sleek black leather briefcase for the second time tonight. He produced a thick, heavy manila folder stamped with a bold red seal. He placed the heavy dossier directly into my waiting hand. The crisp sound of the thick paper cutting through the air silenced my father-forced laughter completely. His eyes locked onto the folder, and the remaining color drained from his face for the second time tonight. He recognized the stark, authoritative formatting of federal documents. I turned and dropped the heavy folder onto the nearest lavish buffet table. You think this money is going to save your fraudulent, crumbling empire? You think I am going to bail you out after what you just confessed to me in your study? I turned back to the crowd, raising my voice so every single mayor, judge, and corporate executive could hear the absolute truth. My father is completely bankrupt, I announced loudly. The collective gasp from the elite audience was instantaneous. Every single commercial property he owns is leveraged to the absolute limit. This magnificent estate you are all drinking in tonight is facing imminent foreclosure. He is a complete financial fraud. Lies, Silas roared, his voice cracking with absolute terror. She is a hysterical liar. I ignored his pathetic screaming. I stepped closer to the buffet table and tapped the thick manila folder with my index finger. Less than 30 minutes ago, my father confessed to committing felony wire fraud. I continued, my voice slicing through the chaotic murmurs of the crowd. He admitted to stealing my social security number. He forged my signature to take out a $150,000 auto loan because his own credit is completely destroyed. He bought that shiny new Tesla sitting in our circular driveway, using my identity so he could project an illusion of wealth to secure a dowry from Camille parents. The crowd erupted into a frenzy of shocked whispers. Darius stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the Persian rug and crashing hard into a decorative marble pillar. "You are insane!" Silas bellowed, spit flying from his lips as he lunged toward the buffet table. Mr. Pierce stepped smoothly in front of me, blocking my father's path with his broad shoulders. The two massive security guards instantly flanked him, placing their hands firmly on their holstered weapons. "I reported you to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for corporate financial fraud and severe identity theft," I stated, my voice radiating absolute lethal calm. "That folder contains the forensic accounting reports, the forged loan applications, and the undeniable proof of your extensive wire fraud. I handed all of it directly to the federal authorities 3 hours ago." He had tried to play a game of financial dominance with a daughter who literally built elite cybersecurity systems for a living. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to execute his complete ruin. Right on cue, a loud, piercing wail shattered the cool night air outside the mansion. The sound started in the far distance but rapidly amplified into a deafening, terrifying scream. The sharp, rhythmic blare of heavy police sirens tore through the quiet, affluent neighborhood. Red and blue emergency lights violently flashed through the tall, arched windows, painting the grand foyer in frantic, alternating colors. The elite guests scrambled backward, pushing against each other to get away from the heavy oak double doors. Tires screeched aggressively against the pavement outside. The sound of heavy boots hitting the driveway echoed through the glass. Through the large front windows, the crowd watched in absolute horror as a fleet of marked police cruisers surrounded the circular driveway, completely blocking the exits. "Look, Camille," father shouted, pointing a trembling finger toward the massive front windows. "The Tesla! They are taking the car!" Everyone turned to look. Two uniformed officers were aggressively attaching a heavy, bright yellow steel boot to the front wheel of the brand-new $150,000 luxury electric vehicle. They were locking it down immediately, securing the fraudulently obtained asset before anyone could attempt to drive it away. A flatbed tow truck was already backing down the long driveway, its reverse lights flashing brightly in the dark. "No," Silas whispered, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "No, this cannot be happening." This is a mistake. I am a man of God. I am a pillar of this community. The heavy oak doors of the mansion burst open with violent force. 4 uniformed police officers stormed into the grand foyer, followed closely by 2 plainclothes detectives wearing severe expressions and flashing golden badges clipped to their belts. The string quartet players dropped their instruments entirely, fleeing toward the back corridors in absolute panic. Silas Adams, the lead detective, announced, his voice booming with undeniable legal authority. He held up a folded white document, stepping past the terrified wealthy guests who practically flattened themselves against the walls to get out of his way. Silas stumbled backward, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "Wait, officer, please," he begged, sweat pouring down his face and staining his starched white collar. "You do not understand. My daughter is confused. This is a minor family misunderstanding. I have $12 million coming to me. I can clear up any temporary discrepancies right now. You are under official investigation for multiple counts of felony identity theft, severe wire fraud, and massive bank deception," the detective stated completely. Ignoring my father, desperate, pathetic bargaining. "We have a federal warrant to secure the premises and confiscate all fraudulently obtained assets, including the vehicle parked outside. Do not make any sudden movements. Keep your hands exactly where I can see them." The 2 uniformed officers stepped forward, instantly grabbing Silas by the arms. They spun him around with rough, practiced efficiency, pressing his chest against the polished mahogany wall. The sound of heavy metal handcuffs clicking tightly around his wrists echoed loudly across the silent, stunned foyer. The great patriarch, the untouchable religious leader, the man who demanded absolute submission from everyone around him, was reduced to a crying, trembling criminal in front of the entire city elite. Darius let out a loud, sobbing wail from his position on the floor. He tried to crawl away toward the back hallway, but a 3rd officer immediately blocked his path, shining a bright tactical flashlight directly into his tear-streaked face. "Darius Adams," the officer demanded, looking down at my pathetic brother. "You are also named in the federal documents as a complicit party in the fraudulent transfer of assets. Do not attempt to leave the building." Camille let out another piercing scream. She ripped the expensive diamond engagement ring off her finger and threw it violently at Darius' head. The heavy stone bounced off his forehead and skittered across the marble floor. "It is over, you pathetic broke loser," she screamed, her face twisted in absolute disgust. "My family is done with you. My father is going to sue you for everything you do not have." Yvonne collapsed onto the floor, her heavy silver gown pooling around her in a pathetic, messy puddle. She covered her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as she watched her husband being marched toward the front doors in handcuffs and her golden child cowering under the harsh glare of a police flashlight. The perfect elite illusion she had spent decades protecting was completely pulverized. I stood quietly next to Arthur Pierce, watching the spectacular destruction unfold. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated my plain white catering uniform. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I did not feel any regret. I felt the crisp, heavy $12 million check resting safely in my apron pocket. I felt the absolute, unshakable power of total independence. I walked freely out the side door into the cool night air. I had barely taken a single breath of the cool night air when a piercing shriek shattered the momentary peace. Camille burst through the side door, completely unhinged. Her perfectly styled hair was now a frantic mess of loose blonde strands sticking to her tear-stained cheeks. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her eyes burning with pure venomous hatred. She refused to accept that her pristine future had just imploded. She actually believed she could salvage this nightmare by attacking the messenger. I turned around, slowly facing the hysterical woman who demanded my complete obedience earlier. "You vicious little monster!" she screamed, stepping aggressively toward me on the patio. "You set him up. You planted those federal documents to frame my fiancé because you are completely jealous of our perfect life. Darius is a brilliant Harvard graduate and a highly respected executive. He is going to be incredibly wealthy. And you are just a pathetic, jealous catering girl trying to ruin his flawless reputation. I will have my father destroy you in court. We will sue you for every single penny of that $12 million. You will rot in a dark, miserable prison cell forever. I stared at her, completely unbothered by her desperate threats. She was clinging to a fantasy that had never actually existed. Her wealthy parents rushed out the door behind her, followed by a large crowd of elite guests who wanted to watch the final confrontation. They spilled onto the patio surrounding us in a tight circle of expensive suits and glittering gowns. The flashing red and blue police lights from the driveway cast harsh, jagged shadows across their panicked faces. I spotted a heavy silver microphone resting on a wooden podium left behind by the hired string quartet event announcer. I stepped past Camille, entirely ignoring her continued screaming. I grabbed the silver microphone and switched on the heavy power button. A loud, sharp feedback squeal echoed across the dark patio, instantly silencing the frantic crowd. I turned around and pointed the microphone directly at Camille. She froze, her mouth clamped shut as the amplification system crackled to life. "You just called my brother a brilliant Harvard graduate and a highly respected executive," I said, my voice booming out over the massive hidden outdoor speakers. The sound bounced against the tall surrounding trees with absolute and undeniable lethal authority tonight. "Your elite family prides itself on being absolutely untouchable and highly exclusive." I continued, gripping the cold metal stem of the microphone tightly. "You boast about your prestigious lineage and your massive generational wealth. You demand total perfection from everyone who enters your sacred social circle. But you never actually ran a simple background check on the golden boy you plan to marry. You were so completely blinded by his fake charm and his tailored suits that you simply believed every single ridiculous lie he fed you. You just handed over your entire future to an absolute pathetic total fraud." Camille's father stepped forward, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "What exactly are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice shaking with sudden, intense panic. "What background check? What lies? My daughter is marrying the most successful young executive in this entire state. Darius is a partner at a premier financial firm. He showed us the official portfolio documents himself. He proved his total net worth to my accountants last month. You are just a bitter, vindictive little girl trying to ruin a beautiful, magnificent celebration because your father clearly favors his brilliant, successful son over you here tonight." I laughed directly into the microphone. The amplified sound was sharp and entirely devoid of any genuine humor. "Brilliant, successful son," I mocked, letting the words hang heavily in the tense evening air. Darius was permanently expelled from Harvard Business School exactly 2 years ago. He never graduated. He never even came close to finishing his required courses. He was caught red-handed orchestrating a massive illegal scheme on campus. He was quietly embezzling thousands of dollars from his own elite student organization funds to pay off his massive underground gambling debts. He is a disgraced, complete academic total failure. A collective gasp ripped through the gathered crowd. Several wealthy women covered their shocked mouths with manicured hands. Camille's mother let out a tiny, horrified shriek, clutching her diamond necklace tightly against her chest. I watched the elite guests frantically whispering to each other, their faces twisting in pure, absolute, scandalized delight. The golden boy reputation was disintegrating right before their very eyes. The untouchable Addams family legacy was burning straight to the ground. Darius was still handcuffed inside the foyer, being aggressively interrogated by furious federal detectives, while I systematically dismantled his entire fake, pathetic, worthless existence right outside. "Liar!" Camille screamed violently, stomping her expensive designer heel against the stone patio. "You are making all of this up because you are an ugly, bitter failure." Darius works at a massive private equity firm downtown. He leaves the estate every single night to manage highly exclusive international portfolios for overseas billionaire clients. He wears tailored Italian suits. He drives a brand new luxury Tesla. You are just a pathetic, angry waitress trying to steal his hard-earned glory. My father will have you arrested for vicious public slander and total criminal defamation of character by early tomorrow morning, guaranteed. I smiled, holding the microphone closer to my lips. "Private equity firm," I repeated, letting out a sharp, derisive scoff. "He leaves every night because he works the graveyard shift as a lowly valet attendant at the Silver Star Casino on the edge of town. He parks the expensive luxury cars of the very same wealthy men he desperately pretends to be. He wears those cheap knockoff suits to look important, but he changes into a polyester casino uniform in the employee locker room every single night. He makes exactly $14 an hour, plus whatever loose tip money remains. Camille physically stumbled backward as if I had just struck her across the jaw. She shook her head rapidly, desperately rejecting the brutal, ugly reality crashing down around her. "No," she gasped, her voice dropping to a terrified, pathetic whisper. "That cannot be true." He showed us his massive bank statements. We saw the confirmed account balances. He has millions of dollars secured in offshore holding accounts. He promised me we would buy a sprawling multi-million-dollar penthouse in the absolute best neighborhood next month. "You are lying. You have to be lying to me right here, right now." I stepped closer, holding her gaze with complete, absolute, merciless detachment. "Those impressive bank statements were completely forged," I stated, my voice projecting cold, hard, undeniable facts to the entire listening crowd. He used a cheap downloaded software template to alter the pathetic numbers on his empty checking account. Every single document he presented to your wealthy father was an entirely fabricated illusion. He does not have millions of dollars secured in any offshore accounts. He is completely drowning in aggressive high-interest payday loans. His massive outstanding debts exceed $50,000. He is completely legally and financially ruined. Camille's father pushed past his sobbing daughter, grabbing the heavy silver microphone stand with white-knuckled, furious hands. Why would he go through such an elaborate, extreme deception? He demanded, his face inches from mine. Why would he construct such a massive, complex lie just to marry Camille? If he is completely broke and working at a cheap local casino, why did his arrogant father agree to host this ridiculously expensive engagement celebration tonight? What exactly is the true ultimate goal of this entire psychotic, fraudulent performance? Answer me right now, you incredibly vindictive, awful little temporary catering server girl. I leaned closer to the microphone, ensuring my voice cut through the cool night air like a heavy executioner blade. "This whole elaborate party is a trap," I announced, cleanly shattering their entire wealthy reality. "You thought you were merging two massive, elite, untouchable dynasties. You thought you were securing a brilliant, flawless future for your precious daughter. But my father is entirely bankrupt and facing imminent federal foreclosure. His sprawling ministry is completely broke. This entire fake engagement was specifically designed to steal your massive family dowry, so my desperate father could save his rotting, pathetic, fake, failing church." Camille let out a final, agonizing wail and collapsed onto the cold stone patio, sobbing hysterically into her hands. Her furious father roared in pure, blinding rage, immediately storming back inside the mansion to personally confront my handcuffed, pathetic father. The surrounding elite guests erupted into chaotic, frantic shouting, violently demanding answers from the remaining confused staff. The untouchable golden child mask was entirely shattered, leaving nothing but worthless dust behind. I handed the heavy microphone back to a completely stunned musician. I turned my back on the absolute, glorious, total ruin, and finally walked away into the quiet darkness. The quiet darkness of the garden edge only held me for a brief, fleeting moment before I reached into my apron pocket. The night was cold, but the adrenaline pumping through my veins burned with a fierce, triumphant heat. I pulled out my heavily encrypted smartphone and stared at the custom application I had designed specifically for this exact moment. My father thought he could silence me by throwing me into the catering staff, but he had foolishly given me full, unrestricted access to the entire estate network. I tapped the glowing red execution icon on my screen and turned around to watch the grand finale unfold from the shadows. The massive high-definition projection screen erected near the champagne fountain was supposed to display a romantic slideshow of Camille and Darius faking their perfect elite courtship. Instead, the screen violently flickered and emitted a loud, sharp, piercing digital screech. Every single panicked guest on the patio instantly turned toward the massive display. The bright white light from the projector illuminated the terrified faces of the city elite. A highly classified disciplinary document from Harvard Business School appeared in brilliant, sharp resolution. The official university seal sat at the top, followed by a brutal, detailed summary of my brother committing gross financial embezzlement. It listed the exact amounts he had stolen from student organization funds to cover his pathetic gambling debts. The crowd leaned in, squinting at the crisp black text that completely destroyed his fake academic reputation. Whispers erupted across the patio as wealthy doctors, lawyers, and corporate executives read the undeniable proof of his total disgrace. The document lingered just long enough for everyone to absorb the humiliating truth before the screen transitioned to the next piece of devastating evidence highlighting his complete lack of real wealth forever. A series of authentic bank statements flashed across the enormous screen. The name Darius Adams was printed clearly at the top alongside a series of pathetic negative balances. The screen showed his continuous, desperate applications for aggressive high-interest payday loans. It displayed a barrage of severely past due notices from aggressive collection agencies threatening immediate legal action. Then the final completely humiliating image appeared in perfect high definition. It was a clear security camera photograph showing Darius wearing a cheap polyester valet uniform standing outside the Silver Star Casino. He was holding open the door of a luxury sedan for a wealthy patron looking absolutely miserable and completely subservient. The golden boy illusion was officially shattered into a million tiny, unrecoverable pieces. The entire engagement party had just watched his elite mask dissolve into a pathetic puddle of lies right in front of their very stunned, judgmental watching eyes. Camille's parents stood frozen near the edge of the stone patio, staring at the screen in absolute mortified horror. Her father's face drained of all color, replaced by a sickly gray pallor as the massive deception fully registered in his brain. His prestigious family name had just been permanently anchored to a massive public scandal. He had paraded this fake executive around his exclusive country club, introducing him to elite investors and powerful politicians. Now every single guest in the mansion knew he had been completely outsmarted by a cheap, desperate casino valet. The profound level of public humiliation was absolutely staggering. Her mother gripped her expensive pearl necklace so tightly that the fragile silk string snapped, sending tiny white spheres bouncing across the polished patio stones. She gasped loudly, covering her mouth, as she realized their massive family dowry was almost stolen to fund this completely fraudulent wedding scheme. Darius staggered forward from the grand foyer, having temporarily escaped the immediate grip of the federal detectives who were busy processing our father. He stumbled onto the patio, his custom-tailored suit jacket hanging crookedly off his trembling shoulders. The harsh glare of the projector screen illuminated his terrified, sweat-slicked face. He looked up at the massive, undeniable evidence of his complete financial and academic ruin. He opened his mouth, attempting to formulate some kind of desperate excuse, but absolutely nothing came out. He just stammered pathetically, gasping for air like a dying fish on dry land. The smooth, arrogant corporate shark persona had entirely vanished, leaving behind a weak, terrified little boy. He raised his hands toward Camille, his fingers trembling violently. "Camille, please?" He choked out, his voice cracking under the intense public scrutiny. "Let me explain everything to you right now. It is a terrible misunderstanding." Camille did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. She marched directly toward Darius, her expensive high heels striking the stone patio with aggressive, lethal intent. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She stopped exactly 1 foot away from him, her chest heaving with deep, angry breaths. "You absolutely pathetic lying sack of garbage," she screamed, her voice echoing loudly against the sprawling mansion walls. "You completely humiliated my family in front of the entire city. You thought you could trick me into marrying a broke, disgraced casino valet." Before Darius could even utter another pathetic, stammering syllable, Camille raised her right hand and slapped him across the face with absolute maximum physical force. The loud, vicious crack of her palm striking his cheek silenced the murmuring crowd instantly. Darius' head snapped violently sideways, leaving a massive, bright red handprint across his skin. She did not stop there. Camille furiously grabbed her left hand, digging her sharp, manicured nails into her own skin. She aggressively yanked the massive 5-carat diamond engagement ring off her finger. The very same ring my father had fraudulently purchased using my stolen identity just to secure this pathetic alliance. "This entire fake wedding is officially permanently cancelled," she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech. "You and your entirely worthless family are completely dead to us forever." She pulled her arm back and violently threw the heavy diamond ring directly into his stunned face. The sharp, expensive metal struck Darius hard right between his eyes before aggressively bouncing off his forehead and falling into the dark, decorative bushes nearby. He recoiled in sheer pain, lifting his trembling hands to cover his face as the crowd watched his absolute, total, ultimate public destruction unfold before them tonight. The utter humiliation radiating from the center of the patio was practically radioactive. The elite wedding of the season had instantly transformed into the most explosive social catastrophe the city had ever witnessed. Camille's father stormed forward, grabbing his daughter by the arm and aggressively pulling her away from the pathetic, disgraced groom. "We are leaving immediately," her father bellowed, his voice thick with absolute disgust. "Do not ever contact my family again, or I will personally ensure you are locked in a federal prison cell for the rest of your miserable life." The wealthy guests who had spent the entire evening sipping vintage champagne and congratulating the happy couple now turned entirely against them. The initial stunned silence rapidly dissolved into a chaotic cacophony of frantic, excited whispering. The socialites could hardly contain their absolute ruthless delight at witnessing the mighty Addams family fall completely from their fake pedestal. All across the crowded patio, dozens of glowing smartphone screens suddenly illuminated the cool night darkness. The elite guests were no longer just watching the complete destruction, they were actively documenting every single humiliating second of it. Cameras were aimed directly at Darius as he cowered alone on the stone patio, clutching his red, stinging face. Videos were instantly being recorded and aggressively uploaded to highly exclusive social media networks, broadcasting the absolute ruin of the golden child to the entire world. I watched the frantic digital documentation with total clinical satisfaction from the quiet edge of the garden. My brother, who had dedicated his entire worthless life to carefully curating a flawless, untouchable public image, was now going to be eternally immortalized as a broke, pathetic, fraudulent casino worker who got violently slapped and dumped at his own fake engagement party, while his father faced severe federal criminal charges. The two federal detectives from the Grand Foyer finally marched outside, grabbing Darius aggressively by his tailored collar. He did not fight back or offer any more pathetic lies. He just slumped forward, entirely defeated, as they dragged him away from the flashing cameras. Camille's parents aggressively shoved their way through the murmuring crowd, refusing to look at anyone as they fled the completely ruined estate. The remaining wealthy guests began to scatter rapidly, abandoning their drinks and rushing toward their expensive cars to completely avoid being associated with the massive federal raid unfolding around them. I touched the heavy $12 million check resting safely in my pocket. The ultimate revenge was now officially complete. They had tried to break me, strip me of my absolute dignity, and steal my brilliant future. Instead, they had completely, utterly destroyed themselves. I smiled, walking away from the glorious ashes forever tonight. I had barely taken 10 steps down the shadowed garden path when a violent commotion erupted behind me near the grand entrance. My father had somehow managed to temporarily wrench his shoulder away from the arresting federal detectives. His face was twisted into a grotesque mask of absolute manic fury. The flashing police lights cast harsh red glares across his sweat-drenched forehead as he wildly thrashed against the heavy metal handcuffs biting into his wrists. He planted his expensive leather shoes firmly onto the manicured front lawn and locked his crazed, bulging eyes directly onto my calm, retreating figure. "You are a viper!" he roared into the chaotic night air, his booming baritone voice completely stripped of its usual smooth, charming, religious authority. "You are an absolute viper, hiding in the grass, waiting to strike your own blood." He was spitting the words out with pure, venomous hatred, desperately clinging to the pathetic illusion that he still possessed any actual power. The remaining elite guests, who had not yet managed to flee to their luxury vehicles, completely froze in their tracks, eagerly turning their heads to witness this final spectacular confrontation between the fallen patriarch and his victorious daughter. "I disown you," Silas bellowed at the absolute top of his lungs, frantically pointing his handcuffed fists toward the heavy wrought iron gates at the end of the long, winding driveway. "You are completely dead to me. You are no longer an Adams. I completely strip you of our prestigious family name forever. Get out of my house immediately. You are trespassing on my private estate, and I demand that you leave right now." He was practically foaming at the mouth, entirely oblivious to the massive federal fraud charges currently hanging over his pathetic, completely ruined, arrogant, balding head today. I stopped walking and slowly turned around to face the pathetic, manic shell of the man who had tormented me for my entire life. I did not feel a single ounce of fear or intimidation. I felt completely, utterly invincible. Mr. Pierce stepped forward from the shadows, moving with the quiet, lethal grace of a highly trained corporate assassin. The brilliant attorney stood firmly by my right side, holding his sleek black leather briefcase with absolute calm precision. He did not say a single word, but his imposing presence immediately signaled to everyone that the final execution was commencing now. I smiled a cold, sharp, razor-thin smile that radiated pure, absolute dominance. I reached out and Mr. Pierce smoothly unlatched his heavy leather briefcase, presenting me with one final, pristine white envelope. I slowly pulled out a thick stack of heavy legal documents bound together by a thick blue ribbon. The crisp, expensive paper glowed under the harsh flashing emergency lights. The federal detectives holding my father paused their aggressive pulling, completely captivated by the sudden shift in the atmosphere. Every single person on the manicured lawn silently held their collective breath, anticipating the incoming lethal, crushing blow tonight. "Your house?" I asked, letting my calm, steady voice project clearly across the quiet, expansive property. I took a slow, deliberate step toward the manic, screaming man. "You actually still believe that this magnificent, sprawling estate belongs to you tonight?" Silas stopped thrashing for a fraction of a second, genuine confusion flashing across his enraged face. "What are you talking about, you crazy, vindictive girl?" He snarled aggressively, trying to step toward me, but failing as the two large federal detectives tightened their heavy grips on his upper arms, holding him securely in place on the damp green grass now. I raised the thick stack of legal documents high into the air, ensuring that every single lingering guest and every single police officer could see the bright red official county seal stamped across the front page. "Last month, the bank completely ran out of patience with your endless, pathetic, fraudulent extensions," I announced, cleanly slicing through his delusion. "They officially foreclosed on this entire massive property. They seized every single inch of this land. They took the mansion, the gardens, the guest houses, and the expensive luxury garage. They auctioned off your completely defaulted, heavily leveraged underwater mortgage immediately today." Silas stared at the documents, his jaw dropping open in absolute, complete, unadulterated horror. The remaining color entirely drained from his flushed face, leaving him looking like a sick, terrified ghost. He had spent months desperately moving stolen funds around, creating complex, fake financial shells, just to hide the impending foreclosure from his wealthy elite congregation. He thought his brilliant, complex deception was completely foolproof. He actually believed he had managed to stall the massive banking executives long enough to successfully steal Camille and her wealthy family dowry. He never anticipated that a private entity would aggressively intervene silently tonight. A highly exclusive private investment firm bought the deed to this entire mansion completely in cash. I continued, my voice ringing out with crystal clear, absolute authority. They paid off the entire massive outstanding balance the exact second the aggressive bank listed the property on the private luxury foreclosure market. They legally acquired the physical house, the surrounding sprawling acreage, and every single piece of expensive custom-imported furniture sitting inside those massive oak doors. The deed was officially permanently transferred and legally recorded by the highest county court exactly 14 days ago, in total, complete, absolute, permanent secrecy now. "Lies," Silas gasped violently, shaking his head back and forth like a trapped, terrified animal. "No private firm would ever buy this property without contacting me directly. I am the sole owner. I am the patriarch of the Adams estate. You forged those papers, just like you forged everything else. He was desperately clinging to the very last shred of his pathetic, crumbling empire, refusing to accept the massive, catastrophic reality crashing down directly onto his head. The federal detectives simply tightened their grips, looking at me with quiet respect, as I completely dismantled the arrogant, fraudulent criminal patriarch here. I took one final step forward, closing the physical distance between us, until I was looking directly into his terrified, panicked, bloodshot eyes. That private investment firm is a highly secure shell corporation entirely owned by Cyber Y stated, delivering the ultimate lethal crushing blow with absolute flawless precision. The name of the elite cybersecurity firm hung in the cold night air, wrapping around his throat like a heavy steel chain. His eyes widened to an impossible massive size as the terrifying recognition finally sparked deep within his pathetic, shattered mind. He finally understood his massive, fatal mistake tonight. And I am the Chief Executive Officer of Cyber, I announced, firmly, claiming my absolute, ultimate, total victory. I am the sole exclusive owner of this entire magnificent, sprawling estate. I own the grass you are standing on right now. I own the expensive marble floors you just walked across. I own the heavy oak doors you just tried to throw me out of. Every single inch of this wealthy, luxurious elite compound legally, officially, and permanently belongs to me. You do not own a single pathetic, solitary blade of grass on this entire, massive, beautiful property anymore today. The absolute, complete, devastating silence that followed my declaration was the most beautiful, incredible sound I had ever experienced in my entire life. Silas simply stopped breathing, his chest completely freezing, as the total, massive, overwhelming magnitude of his absolute ruin finally crushed his entire spirit into fine, invisible dust. He looked like a man who had just been violently struck by a massive, speeding freight train. He had spent his entire worthless, pathetic existence relentlessly trying to break me, silence me, and completely control me. Instead, I had quietly, systematically purchased the very ground beneath his expensive feet forever. So you cannot disown me, and you certainly cannot throw me out of my own house, I stated cleanly, folding the heavy legal documents and casually handing them back to the waiting Mr. Pierce. In fact, you are the one who is currently trespassing on my private property. I looked directly at the two large federal detectives who were firmly holding my completely paralyzed, silent, terrified father. Officers, I smiled, radiating pure, absolute, polite authority. I would like to formally request that you immediately remove this pathetic, broke, trespassing criminal from my beautiful private estate right now. Please, thank you. The lead detective actually smiled back, giving me a sharp, quick, respectful nod. With pleasure, madam, he replied smoothly, yanking Silas completely off balance. The detectives aggressively marched my broken, defeated father toward the back of the waiting police cruiser, shoving his head down as they locked him inside the dark, caged back seat. The flashing emergency lights illuminated my pristine white catering uniform one final glorious time as the heavy police vehicles finally rolled down my long, winding driveway. I stood completely alone on my massive, expensive, gorgeous manicured front lawn, breathing in the sweet, crisp air of total freedom. This house is mine, I declared, my voice slicing through the cold night air with absolute lethal precision. I looked down at the pathetic, shivering forms of my former family. You were right about one thing, though, Silas. Failures absolutely do not belong here. You have exactly 2 hours to pack your bags and get off my property. Silas and Yvonne utterly collapsed onto the damp grass, their knees physically buckling under the massive, crushing weight of their total ruin. The church elders who had attended the engagement party watched them fall from the patio edge. Silas frantically crawled toward them, begging his wealthy congregation for immediate help. He desperately grabbed the tailored pant leg of the senior bishop, pleading for sanctuary, pleading for a loan, pleading for mercy. The elders simply looked down at him, their faces twisted into masks of pure, unadulterated disgust over the massive, undeniable fraud they had just witnessed. The senior bishop violently kicked his leg free, turning his back on the disgraced, screaming patriarch. The other elders followed suit, marching rapidly toward their luxury cars without offering a single shred of sympathy. Their flawless respectability, the single precious thing they valued above absolutely everything else in this world, was officially permanently ground into fine, worthless dust. The remaining federal agents explicitly informed Yvonne and my disgraced brother Darius that the 2-hour countdown had officially begun. I walked back into the grand foyer and stood by the massive marble staircase, watching the frantic scramble unfold. Yvonne was hysterically sobbing, her perfect, expensive makeup ruined, running down her face in thick, dark streaks. She was desperately trying to shove her countless designer dresses and imported shoes into cheap black plastic trash bags. The federal agents strictly forbidden them from taking any expensive luggage since those items were purchased with stolen funds and legally belonged to the estate. Watching this cruel, arrogant woman dragging heavy garbage bags across the pristine marble floors was a beautiful sight I would cherish forever. She looked entirely ridiculous, her expensive jewelry clashing with the shiny black plastic dragging behind her. Darius was faring no better. The former golden boy was sweating profusely, aggressively, shoving his custom-tailored suits into his own pathetic plastic bags. The mansion that had once been their fortress of arrogance had instantly transformed into their ultimate prison of shame. Every step they took toward the mahogany front doors echoed loudly through the cavernous foyer, marking the definitive end of their dynasty. Darius finally reached the front door, dragging 3 heavy trash bags behind him. His face was a mask of pure, defeated rage. He stopped at the threshold, breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his ruined, expensive suit jacket. He dropped the plastic bags onto the stone porch and turned to face me one last time. The federal agents standing nearby watched him closely, hands resting near their duty belts, ready to intervene if he tried anything foolish. But Darius was completely broken. He had absolutely no fight left in him physically. Instead, he resorted to the only weapon he had ever known, which was pathetic, desperate verbal cruelty. He glared at me with eyes full of venomous hatred. "You think you won?" He spat out, his voice shaking with uncontrolled rage. "You think taking this house and destroying our father makes you a winner? You are a cold, heartless monster, Nia. You destroyed your own flesh and blood tonight. You planned this entire setup just to humiliate us and ruin our perfect lives." He took a ragged breath, pointing a trembling finger directly at my face. "You are going to die completely alone," he cursed, his voice echoing against the tall stone pillars of the grand entrance. "You have all this money and this massive house, but you have absolutely no family left. Nobody will ever truly love you. You will spend the rest of your miserable life entirely alone." His desperate, bitter words hung in the cool night air, intended to cut me down, to make me feel small and isolated. In the past, his cruel taunts would have absolutely crushed my spirit. I would have internalized the massive guilt and questioned my own worth endlessly. But I was no longer the frightened, silenced girl they had abused for years. I was the chief executive officer of Cyber, and I knew exactly who I was. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling nothing but profound pity for the pathetic man standing before me. "I would rather be alone in the truth than perform in your circus of lies," I replied, my voice ringing with absolute calm, unwavering authority. "Your version of family is nothing but a toxic prison of manipulation and fraud. I am finally completely free. Get off my property, Darius." I turned my back on him, signaling to the federal agents that the conversation was officially over. The heavy wooden mansion doors swung shut with a loud, definitive, booming thud, completely severing my ties to that bloodline forever. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed brilliantly through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in downtown Atlanta. I sat behind a sleek, modern glass desk reviewing the latest financial reports for Cyber. The company had exploded in unprecedented growth, securing massive government and private contracts, making me one of the youngest and most successful technology executives in the country. But my greatest achievement was not the soaring profit margins or the extensive media coverage praising my innovative cybersecurity software. My greatest achievement was the foundation I had established using my newfound massive wealth. I created a comprehensive, fully funded scholarship program specifically designed to support brilliant young Black women entering the highly competitive technology and engineering fields. I wanted to ensure that no talented girl ever had to shrink herself, hide her absolute brilliance, or endure the kind of toxic suppression I had survived. We were currently funding full tuition housing and top-tier elite mentorship programs for over 200 incredible young women across the nation. Every time I signed an approval form for a new scholarship recipient, I felt a deep sense of healing and ultimate purpose restoring my soul. I was building a real authentic family of empowered, brilliant women who fiercely supported and elevated each other every single day. While my professional and personal life soared to unimaginable heights, my former family was experiencing the crushing consequences of their lifelong massive deception. The federal criminal trial for Silas Adams had officially begun, and it was an absolute public spectacle of complete, total ruin. The daily news broadcast showed him shuffling into the federal courthouse looking sickly, dramatically aged, and entirely defeated. He was wearing an ill-fitting, cheap synthetic suit, a stark, humiliating contrast to his former custom-tailored, arrogant grandeur. The federal prosecution had an airtight concrete case revealing decades of massive financial embezzlement, aggressive tax evasion, and severe wire fraud. The fragile respectability and elite social status that Silas and Yvonne had valued above absolutely everything else had been completely aggressively ground into fine, worthless dust. They were total pathetic pariahs, eternally disgraced and facing multiple decades in a grim federal prison. And Darius, the former golden boy who had faked his way through elite business schools using my stolen identity and stolen funds, was currently mopping dirty floors on the night shift at a cheap budget motel on the dangerous outskirts of the city. He had absolutely no degree, no money, and no fake corporate executive job to hide behind anymore. I stood up from my sleek glass desk and walked over to the massive window looking out over the sprawling, vibrant city below. The incredible journey from being a silenced, abused catering worker, hiding in my own home, to becoming a powerful CEO had been brutally difficult, but necessary. I learned the most vital, profound lesson of my entire existence. You must never, ever shrink yourself to accommodate the toxic insecurities of your blood relatives. Sometimes the very people who share your DNA are the exact same people trying to drown you. Do not ever let their cruel labels define your inherent worth. Do not perform in their exhausting circus of lies just to keep a fake peace. True, genuine, lasting peace only comes when you violently shatter the false illusions and boldly claim your authentic, brilliant truth. You have the absolute tremendous power to evict the heavy toxicity from your daily life and successfully build an untouchable empire from the ashes of their blind underestimation. The absolute best revenge is not just publicly exposing their darkness, it is actively building a brilliant light of your own massive success. Share your inspiring stories of survival and triumph in the comments below if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your peace and future. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering true stories of breaking free and building your magnificent empire today.